A young king, a massive army, and a dream to conquer the unknown. His name was Alexander the Great. In just a few years, he would defeat the mighty Persian Empire, cross deserts and mountains, and march deep into Asia. But how did a young prince become one of history's greatest conquerors? This is the extraordinary story of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, the story of the young king who tried to reach the end of the world. Step 1. The boy who was born into a kingdom of ambition. Long before Alexander became known as Alexander the Great, before armies followed him across mountains and deserts, before kings bowed before him and cities were built in his name, he was simply a child born into the royal family of Macedonia. His father was King Philip II of Macedon, a powerful and ambitious ruler who had transformed Macedonia from a kingdom often threatened by its neighbors into one of the strongest powers in the Greek world. His mother was Olympias, a proud and intensely religious woman from Epirus. She believed that her son was destined for something extraordinary. Alexander grew up surrounded by stories of heroes. He heard about Achilles, the legendary warrior of the Trojan War. Achilles was not merely a character in an old story to Alexander. He became an example of the kind of person Alexander wanted to be. Alexander wanted glory, but he did not want ordinary glory. He wanted his name to survive after his body was gone. As a boy, he learned that being born a prince was not enough. A prince could inherit a throne, but a great king had to prove himself. His father taught him politics, warfare, diplomacy, and leadership. Other teachers educated him in literature, philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and science. Among the most important of his teachers was the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle did not simply teach Alexander how to memorize facts. He introduced him to a much larger intellectual world. Alexander learned about geography, animals, plants, medicine, government, philosophy, and the cultures beyond Greece. He also developed an enormous curiosity about the world. This curiosity would eventually become one of the forces driving his conquests. Alexander wanted to know what was beyond the next mountain, then beyond the next river, then beyond the next kingdom. And eventually, he wanted to know what existed at the edge of the known world. The young prince was therefore shaped by two powerful influences. From his father, he learned how to conquer. From his teachers, he learned to wonder. Those two forces would remain inside him throughout his life. Step 2. The horse nobody could tame. One of the most famous stories from Alexander's childhood concerns a horse. The horse was called Bucephalus. He was magnificent, powerful, and difficult to control. Several experienced riders tried to mount him. They failed. The horse became frightened whenever he saw his own shadow. Most people believed the animal was simply too wild to be useful. But Alexander noticed something that others had missed. He realized that the horse was frightened by the shadow moving beside him. Instead of fighting the animal, Alexander turned the horse toward the sun. The shadow moved behind them. The horse became calmer. Alexander approached him gently, mounted him, and rode him. Philip watched his son carefully. According to the famous tradition, Philip told Alexander that Macedonia was too small for him. Whether the exact words were spoken or not, the story captures something important about Alexander. He believed difficult problems could be solved by understanding them rather than simply attacking them. That quality would later appear on battlefields. When an enemy seemed impossible to defeat, Alexander looked for the weakness. When a city seemed impossible to capture, he searched for another method. When mountains blocked his path, he searched for passes. When rivers stood between him and his objective, he built bridges or found crossings. Bucephalus became Alexander's legendary companion. The horse would eventually carry him through battles across thousands of miles. For Alexander, the animal represented more than strength. It represented trust. The king trusted the horse. The horse trusted the king. Their partnership became one of the most enduring stories associated with Alexander's life. Step 3. The prince becomes a soldier. Alexander did not grow up as a sheltered prince. His father expected him to become a warrior. Macedonia possessed an extremely effective military system. Its famous infantry fought with long spears called sarissas. These soldiers could form an enormous wall of spear points. But the Macedonian army was not only about infantry. Its cavalry was especially important. The companion cavalry consisted of elite mounted warriors who could strike at an enemy's weak point with tremendous force. Alexander learned how these forces worked tug.
The infantry could hold an enemy in place. The cavalry could attack from the side or rear. The result was not simply a collection of soldiers, it was a carefully coordinated machine. Alexander learned to command this machine. He also learned that battles were not won only through courage, they were won through timing. A commander needed to know when to wait, when to attack, when to retreat, when to deceive, when to take a risk. Alexander was naturally courageous, but his courage was often combined with calculation. That combination made him dangerous. Step 4. Alexander faces his first real test. While still young, Alexander was given responsibilities that would have frightened many older men. His father left him in charge of Macedonia on some occasions while Philip was away. Alexander was expected to govern. He also participated in military campaigns. During one major battle against Greek forces, the young Alexander commanded cavalry. He was still a teenager, yet he played an important role in the Macedonian victory. This experience changed how others saw him. Alexander was no longer merely Philip's son. He had demonstrated that he could fight. More importantly, he had demonstrated that he could command. But success created a dangerous problem. Alexander was ambitious. Philip was ambitious. Two powerful personalities inside one royal family could easily become rivals, and eventually the relationship between father and son became complicated by politics, marriage, succession, and suspicion. Alexander's future was not guaranteed. Step 5. The family becomes a battlefield. Philip married again. The new marriage created anxiety around Alexander. A new wife could potentially give Philip another son. If that happened, Alexander's position as heir might be threatened. The royal court became filled with tension. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was fiercely protective of her son's future. Alexander himself became increasingly independent. He and his father sometimes disagreed strongly. Their relationship was not simple. There was admiration between them, but there was also competition. Philip had created the military power that Alexander would later inherit. Alexander knew that, but Alexander also wanted to become more than his father's successor. He wanted his own legend. He wanted to accomplish something Philip had not accomplished. That opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. Step 6. The king falls. Philip II was assassinated. The man who had built Macedonian power was suddenly dead. Alexander was still very young, and immediately the kingdom faced danger. A young king was often seen as an opportunity. Enemies could rebel, neighboring peoples could attack, rivals could claim the throne. Some Greek cities had resisted Macedonian control and now believed they might be able to regain their independence. Alexander moved quickly. He became king. Then he acted with extraordinary speed. He secured his position inside Macedonia. Potential rivals were removed. Rebellions were suppressed. The young king made it clear that he was not a child who could be pushed aside. He was the new ruler, and he intended to remain ruler. Step 6. The king falls. Philip II was assassinated. The man who had built Macedonian power was suddenly dead. Alexander was still very young, and immediately the kingdom faced danger. A young king was often seen as an opportunity. Enemies could rebel. Neighboring peoples could attack. Rivals could claim the throne. Some Greek cities had resisted Macedonian control and now believed they might be able to regain their independence. Alexander moved quickly. He became king. Then he acted with extraordinary speed. He secured his position inside Macedonia. Potential rivals were removed. Rebellions were suppressed. The young king made it clear that he was not a child who could be pushed aside. He was the new ruler, and he intended to remain ruler. Step 7. The Greek cities test him. News of Philip's death encouraged resistance in parts of Greece. Some cities believed Macedonian power might collapse. Alexander marched south. His army moved rapidly. The message was simple: Macedonia was still powerful. Alexander demanded recognition of his authority. Some cities submitted. Others hesitated. Then came the most dramatic rebellion. The city of Thebes openly resisted Alexander. Thebes had once been one of the strongest powers in Greece. Alexander surrounded the city. The Thebans refused to surrender. The fighting was severe. Eventually, the Macedonian army broke through. The city was destroyed. Many inhabitants were killed or enslaved. The destruction of Thebes sent a terrifying message throughout Greece. Alexander was young, but he was not weak. Cities that had considered rebellion quickly reconsidered. Alexander had secured the Greek world behind him. Now he could turn his attention toward the greatest. Some cities submitted, others hesitated. Then came the most dramatic rebellion. The city of Thebes openly resisted Alexander. Thebes had once been one of the strongest powers in Greece. Alexander surrounded the city. The Thebans refused to surrender. The fighting was severe. Eventually, the Macedonian army broke through. The city was destroyed. Many inhabitants were killed or enslaved. The destruction of Thebes sent a terrifying message throughout Greece. Alexander was young, but he was not weak. Cities that had considered rebellion quickly reconsidered. Alexander had secured the Greek world behind him. Now he could turn his attention toward the greatest prize in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Persian Empire. Step 8. The dream of conquering Persia. For generations, the Persian Empire had been one of the most powerful states on earth. Its territory stretched across enormous distances. It controlled lands from the Eastern Mediterranean deep into Asia. Persian kings commanded huge armies. Greek cities had fought Persia before. The memory of the Persian invasions remained powerful. Alexander presented his campaign partly as a Greek-Macedonian expedition against Persia. But Alexander's personal ambitions were much larger. He wanted conquest. He wanted glory. He wanted to surpass the heroes of the past. And he wanted to reach lands that few Greeks had seen. Before leaving Europe, Alexander had to make sure Macedonia would not collapse in his absence. He appointed trusted people to govern. Then he gathered his army. Thousands of soldiers prepared to cross into Asia. The young king was about to begin the campaign that would define his entire life. Step 9. Alexander crosses into Asia. When Alexander entered Asia, he was not yet ruler of a vast empire. He was a young king leading an army. His first major encounters were with Persian forces. Alexander won an early victory near the Granicus River. The battle was dangerous. Alexander personally fought near the front. This was one of the characteristics that made him inspiring to his soldiers. He did not command safely from far behind. He often placed himself where the fighting was most dangerous, but this also meant that he repeatedly came close to death. At the Granicus, he was almost killed. His companions protected him. The victory opened much of Western Asia Minor to Alexander. Cities began falling under his control. Some welcomed him, others resisted. Alexander continued moving. Step 10. The Gordian Knot. Alexander eventually reached the city of Gordium. There he encountered a famous object, a complicated knot connected with an ancient prophecy. The story said that whoever could untie the knot would become ruler of a vast territory in Asia. Alexander examined it. He tried to understand how it worked. Then he reportedly drew his sword and cut through the knot. Whether the story happened exactly that way or became exaggerated over time, it became symbolic of Alexander's character. He did not always solve problems according to traditional expectations. If an obstacle stood between him and his goal, he searched for a direct solution. The legend of the Gordian knot became a metaphor for decisive action. Alexander was not interested in spending his life trapped by conventions. He intended to create his own path. Step 11. The Persian king comes into view. The Persian king was Darius III. Darius possessed enormous resources. His empire was far larger than Alexander's kingdom. If the conflict became a simple contest of numbers, Alexander could have been in serious trouble. But Alexander had advantages. His army was experienced, his commanders were highly capable, his infantry formation was disciplined, his cavalry was powerful, and Alexander himself was an exceptional battlefield commander. The two armies eventually met at Issus. The battlefield was relatively narrow. This helped Alexander. Darius could not easily use his enormous numerical advantage. Alexander attacked aggressively. The Macedonian army pushed toward the Persian center. Alexander personally led a cavalry charge. The Persian position began to collapse. Darius fled. His army followed. The Persian king had been defeated. Alexander had achieved something extraordinary. He had defeated the ruler of the largest empire in the region, but the war was not over. Darius was alive, and Alexander wanted more. Step 12. The Persian royal family. After Issus, Alexander captured the Persian king's family. This could have become a story of humiliation, but Alexander treated them with respect. The women of the royal family were given protection. They were allowed to maintain their dignity. This became an important part of Alexander's reputation. He could be extremely violent toward cities that resisted him, but he could also show mercy toward defeated rulers and their families.